looking at the turnout today, it looks like everyone out there is pretty busy, so thanks to those that have come today. But it's always a good opportunity for us to provide an update, and obviously with us recording it, we can share that with those that can't make it. But thanks for those that have come today. The agenda for today is really to run through the projects and give you guys an update on where everything is at. And if time allows, I've got a little update just around the change management component and some of the challenges and learnings that Karen and I are working through as we sort of go through this journey, and then we can have any Q&A at the end and so forth. So we'll get straight into it because there is quite a bit to move through with the projects. And to kick off, we have an update on academic guidance from the project manager, Rach Monteo.
Cool. Thanks, Marcus. So there's been a lot going on this month, and I was thinking about how to put it on slides in an effective narrative because it's been a little bit bitsy and stuff. So I thought that today what I would actually take you through is some of the things that we've been going through that relate to data. Because that's probably been the strongest kind of underlying current for the work that we've been going through recently. And so just bearing in mind that these are the 4 areas that we were looking for, we're trying to find a way to make the course selector provide as much functionality and as much direction for students as we possibly can. The question that we run into often is how do we use the data structures that we have to guide the students in the best way? So I wanted to give you a couple of examples of that. So from a feature standpoint, Course Selector has been our #1 priority. And from a data standpoint, we've really been focusing on the back end. What we have in the back of our mind is that October is really important. Hey, Allison. So we're trying to chunk things up in as cohesive enough manner so that we can get kind of common performance from the Course Selector across all of the qualifications. So prerequisites is an area that we've been looking into, and I just wanted to give you an idea of how, we've got 3,500 courses, and those 3,500 courses can have a variety of prerequisite requirements behind them. And we've got some streams of work that are happening just around increasing sort of the consistency so that students can, if you're in quite an open degree, they can flow between subjects easily. But another thing that we find is that the data in our systems is very separate from each other. So for example, we have information in our course catalog, we have information in the regulations printed book, and we also have information in the course information system, and we also have information in JADE. And while we want all this stuff to work for the Course Selector, yes, what we're also trying to do is to create a little bit of a legacy of aligning these things so that people after Student First can really use this data more effectively as well. And this is an example. So, if you look at the website and you see what the prerequisites for the courses are, you might say, okay, well, for this particular course, we've got these 4 geography restrictions against it. And you might think, well, all of that must be working properly. But if you actually look down in JADE, you'll find that that information that is being fed from somewhere else in the system is not replicated down here, which is problematic. So if we want the course selector to be guiding students and saying, hey, sorry, you can't take this course because you have this restriction or this prerequisite or something along those lines, we have to go through every single course and make sure that those things are mapping up. And I know Kat has gone through some of this, I believe, with you, Ross, just to kind of say which one is real, Because it's not just a matter sometimes of saying, well, that one's right, but this one's wrong. A lot of times you have 3 conflicting data sets, and you actually don't know what the right one is. So it doesn't just mean that a machine can sort it out. Like, you actually have to have conversations with the people that are the experts in these areas to understand what's right. So I should thank anybody here that has been part of that process in the room, because we have taken up a lot of your time kind of sorting through those things. Thank you, all of you. Another thing that we'll run into, and this might seem like a really small thing, but here's an example of a prerequisite for a biology course. And I'm not sure, it looks relatively straightforward, right? There's 3 things up there. But what's really interesting is that this could actually mean 2 very, very different things. So depending on where you put the brackets, it could be you need to take this or this. and that, or this, or that and that, right? So it's such a small thing, but that really impacts on the integrity of the data that we're sort of working through. And again, it requires the brains of very intelligent people to be able to look at each one of these things and say, well, this is what's right. More importantly, though, than just cleaning this up, we're trying to create patterns and precedents within the system to say, if you ever have a structure like this, use this template, because this is what's going to sort of keep the consistency in the back end going forward. So this is just a snapshot of, and this is actually like perhaps a week or two old, but where Katrina, who's our business analyst working on the project, was with sort of assessing these things. So quite a few courses. We had gotten through 1,500, and there was about 10% of those courses that really needed some sort of reconciliation. So little by little, we're chugging through these things, and little by little, we're trying to put the right processes in place to make sure that these things can be maintained going forward. Another thing that I wanted to talk about was completion structures, because if you kind of think about how the course selector is taking students through picking their courses, it's based on the end point that they want to achieve. So when you look through the regulations and it says, in order to graduate with a Bachelor of Arts, you need to complete this many courses at that level, this many courses within this subject, those are actually the completion requirements of the degree, but when someone's selecting, they want them in the back of their mind. So there's two ways that we can do that. I'm going to show you the uber perfect way first, and then I'm going to compare it to the less perfect way and let you understand how that might affect functionality that people see in the course selector in October. So if you think about the BA, those little words up there, it has a structure. And within that structure, there are things called majors. And there are lots of majors. And then within the majors, you have things called minors that live within them. And then you may, perhaps I shouldn't have put the BA as a representation up there, but imagine this is any degree. You might have core courses, and there might be more than one. So what ends up happening is that if you want to create a perfect guide for a student, then you need to create this structure, and this structure, and this structure, and this structure, and that one, 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 and that one. And it's a lot of structures. It takes a lot of time to build those things. Now it's where we want to get to, and we have created some efficiency by saying your minor will always live inside your major. Imagine if it didn't live within there, and then you had completely separate structures. There would be like 70 more entities and stuff. So there is definitely efficiency within the nesting process that's taken place, but it's still a lot of things to build. So what if instead you said, right, well, let's just give people a list of subjects, because each one of these is effectively a subject. Let's take that guide for the regulations that says, well, you know, you need to take this many at 100 level, this many at 200 level, and let's just roughly talk about the number of points that someone needs to take. Now, that's not going to be a perfect guide for the students, because there are some things that are more specific. But what it's going to do is potentially get you 80 to 90% of the way there. So the reason why I bring this up is because we identified early on that completion rules could be a very, very constructive way of helping students get guided through the course selector. But as I mentioned, it takes a while to build every single one of these entities. So what we imagine is going to happen with the course selector is that certain qualifications are going to have completed structures that give it sort of 100% accuracy against it. And then other qualifications, we can get 80 to 90% of the way there by allowing these filtration criteria to occur. We're going to see how far we can get as we work through building the structures and this information. And we're taking the guide of the deans and the academic managers in terms of saying, well, if we're going to build these structures that take time, what are the most important ones for you? And what we found so far is that most people would like us to focus on undergraduate qualifications, because we're talking about students that are brand new to the university. Also by number of enrollments and applications and that sort of thing. So it's all very, very sensible. But eventually we'll get to the point where we'll move away from this crude filter and replace it with a filter that has these structures embedded into it, which is something that we discussed at the working group yesterday. So just wanted to make you guys aware of how like a lot of times we talk about data and we say, oh, it's really, really complicated and these, some of it's dirty and stuff, and it just sounds really, it sounds vague and it sounds really uncertain, but these are actual instances of what we're confronted with. And the wonderful thing about this is that it's not just about cleaning things up so we can get course selector right, but once these structures and consistent kind of mechanisms are put in place, they can be leveraged for really amazing stuff. And I'm thinking of ELIZA right now in terms of like insight and how we can measure performance and things along those lines. It's really, really enabling. So I don't mean to get too excited about it, but I find it really cool. And sorry, this is the last thing I wanted to point out, which is a slightly old rendition of the course selector. But all of this stuff effectively is what drives these fields up here, which is where the student, when they come into the course selector, is sort of figuring out how to drive and how to choose the courses that they need. So if you sort of think about how you search when you go to a website or Amazon or something along those lines, this is really where all your decision making happens. Sometimes filtration criteria over on the side. But all of that data is really, really important to allow this to make these responses come through correctly. Does anybody have any questions? I just want to reiterate thank you to the working group, because getting this stuff right would not be possible without them, and they have been so supportive in the midst of some really, really busy times in helping us to get there, so really appreciate it. Okay, James.
Thanks, Rach. I've drawn you a picture today so that I can talk to you about the delivery process, where we're currently at, and what's coming up. I also want to take a little bit of time today to actually explain how we work in the delivery team, to explain to you why and how and when it's important to interact with business analysts and help us with the requirements process, so you can see how that creates ripple effects and ultimately affects the end product that's going to come out. So I'll navigate you first here. Across the top we have the timeline. This is the week that we're in right now, is July 2nd through the 6th. And I've got it going up to October, which is what we want to hit some deadlines for so that you guys are prepared for the busy season. But we have it going out until December. And the way we work is we have parallel streams of delivery that overlap each other, kind of like a conveyor belt. So as this August release, which is where that orange star is, as this August release is tracking through and the development team is working on the priorities that we want to develop and deliver for August, the business analysts are talking to you about the priorities for the September release, which should get us prepared for what you need in the business for October. And likewise, as that's tracking through, they'll also be analyzing things that become from a foggier and foggier to more clear picture for what we're going to deliver before we go on Christmas break and go into the holidays. And what it looks like as we deliver, you can see we have offset white and black kind of 2-week blocks. Those are our sprints. So with the agile development, work in sprints, it's all about iterative development and business feedback. Well, we've got 3 sprints of work in this development pipeline. And then we've got about a sprint to do all the release and final kind of packaging activities before it gets pushed out, so that we have a lot of confidence in what we're pushing out. This also has 3 2-week blocks. And then this last one is going to have about 4. So we'll be able to get something a little bit chunkier out before Christmas. But we want to make sure, based on the business calendar, what you need for October, that those priorities are right. And there are a couple of ways that we do that. So I'm going to talk to you about the priorities that we have currently in our backlog for these releases, and then explain the ways that you can leverage or change those priorities if you think that that's necessary. So right now, we are working on the course selector, as you saw with Rachel's presentation, and display offer of place, which didn't go out as we wanted for the agent portal release on the 28th. So we are still working on that to come out in the August release. Also, based on feedback from IRO, we know that there are things that we need to do to the easy enrollment flow to make it cater to international students better. And so we're packaging up enhancements. We're calling them agent portal enhancements, but they're really about making EE more internationally friendly. So we want to get some of those out in August. And staff admin functions is for that staff portal. So we've been working on this for a while, and it's all about making sure that it's ready in time for October. So while we're thinking about that, we're also analyzing the other things that we need to do for returning student, being able to choose their qual. But there will also be more course selector work. So we won't be able to do everything for the course selector in August. But what we are going to do is we're going to put enhancements on the MVP that we've already created. Remember, that's minimum viable product. And test with the academic managers sometime here in early August, which kind of de-risks our delivery in September for the October kind of rush. So that way we know that we're working well, that the enhancements are working well as we continue to iterate and develop throughout here. This is likely not going to be as heavy of a development period as it will be a testing period, because we want to make sure that what we roll out is that we have a lot of confidence in it. And course selector is the big ticket item, as well as getting the staff portal right so that staff are able to more effectively manage applications on behalf of students or help students, which should reduce the actual manual effort that it takes to help get things through during this busy time. And then we have a lot of work to do on returning students, choosing their qual, that's going to come out to the November-December release. Now that's really important because that enables all the change of enrollment work, which also creates a lot of manual work and pain and stuff that we can reduce by creating more tools and functions that puts the power back in the hands of the student. So that's kind of the enhancements we're working on in the way that it's dropping. And so as you can tell, when the business analysts are talking to you, they may be talking to you in July about something that's going to release near October, or something in July that's going to release in November. But if it doesn't happen, if they don't have their requirements in order, or they're not able to get access to users to test with, or there are delays in communication here, then you can see how it has a ripple effect in that if there was a delay in the analysis for the course selector back here, and say in June, and it affects the course selector that we know is going to be broken into two parts, then actually what's happening back there delays our release near October. So that just kind of helps give you a little bit more of a picture of the way we work. And as far as the priorities go, if there are things that you think, where is this or where is that? I really think this is more important than that. The way that we currently do our priorities is we take all of the prioritized epics, which if you remember the way that we work in Agile, you have initiatives, and then epics or features, which are kind of synonyms, and then stories underneath that make up the technical tasks that go into creating that feature. So those epics, we need those prioritized by you, by the business. And the way that we get that final sign-off, especially because there are things that some parts of the business really need, but other parts don't want or don't need, is we have what we call a DMA. That's the decision-making authority. So that's a composite group of the different product owners from the different streams of work and projects. And those people have a voice in the final things that get prioritized and what ultimately gets pushed into these releases. So definitely talk to each other, talk to your bosses, talk to us, if you think there are things that need to be changed, prioritized, so that we can get that voice heard when we talk about priorities with the DMA. Any questions or thoughts? Cool. All right. For those who attended last time,
similar slide, a few changes. So where we are now is we've done essentially the first round of what we call our smoke testing, so we've actually productionised a lot of the components already, and I now have my transcript in digital form. They revoked my testimonial because I was too old, so I didn't have the right signature on. So, and we've pretty much finalised all the testing now. We're just running through what we call regression testing. So I've called UAT, but it's really just regression testing and just going through making sure nothing has sort of changed inadvertently. And what we're going to look to do next Monday and Tuesday is run what we call the second round of smoke testing in production, and that we've got a group of sort of volunteers, and so the initial smoke test round there was only a few of us, myself, Mark and Samantha Reeson, who got certificates. We're going to expand that just slightly wider and just sort of see how people get on with, you know, using things, how intuitive is everything. I found it pretty good, but then I have the background in the project, so and then once we do that, all going well, then next Thursday the 12th we'll officially go live, and it's going to be more of sort of a soft launch. We'll have productionised just about everything anyway, so we'll flick a couple of switches, repoint a server, put some stuff on the web, and it will be live. But theoretically we could probably even start putting stuff out before then. So it's sort of just an approach that sort of de-risks things, so we don't do a big bang on go live and then find out there's problems and all that. So on the training side of things, so we've had contact centre training, enrolment information desk, which I think was combined, and the IT service desk training. We're going to run through weeks training tomorrow, I believe, and the program is going to provide support for a month after go live, and so that's when we'll work. We've had meetings with ITS, but we'll work a bit closer with them in terms of sort of the handover and all that. And on also go live, we'll push out the remaining changes. So we've got changes in terms of the UC Web, the transcripts, and the online ordering portal. Again, we've put them in production. We just need to push them over the ledge, so to speak. And communications will be ongoing from go live. We're not going to do a big bang for that because it's quite a busy time for the regs department. They don't want a whole lot of extra traffic coming in, but rather just slowly ramp up. So, yeah. So that is my equals. Any questions? No. That'll be the last presentation. I might have to give one more next time just to say yes, everything is fine, but that'll be more of a footnote, I'd say. So, right, scholarships. Okay. So. From last time, again, this is sort of quite similar. You see a pattern here. I'm reusing a lot of material, just to sort of make sure you've got that sort of continuity and sort of context in what I'm presenting. So last time, I said the main focus was the school leavers round, so that's essentially started now. As of last week, I think we had 413 applications that were started. And students are taking their time to complete those because I think the window was the 15th of August for those to shut off. So that was going quite well. There was a few things that popped up around sort of support and that we got onto, but it was primarily sort of on the user, I'll say error side. But yeah, there wasn't anything that was that popped up in terms of what we developed, which is really good. There was one thing that we knew about in terms of the log-on experience isn't optimal. That was known prior, so that's something that we're going to be sort of focusing on for sort of future rounds. Just in terms of how it integrates with MyUC EE. And so the focus now will be on the postgrad round, which sort of kicks off. I've just said July because unlike the school leavers round, it's staggered from mid-July onwards. So when Leanne comes back, we'll be meeting with her and just making sure that everything's set up in terms of the application process. So because we've done a lot of, I suppose, configuration for the school leavers round in terms of the application form and messaging, we should be able to reuse a lot of that for the postgrad round, but they're different scholarships, so they have to be set up. Some components will be separate. And in alignment with that, so what we're working through now, as mentioned last time, is the selection committee process. So we're going to just take an example, or sort of a subset, probably look at one college department and engage them just around, rather than reviewing scholarships individually, we can look to package them up and get a more collective committee together to assess them. So just because of the vast number of stakeholders and committees, we wouldn't be able to have everything lined up for the postgrad round. So we're going to see, again, when Leanne comes back, which ones we want to target. And we've also got the decision-making process, so we have to run things by SMT, AAC, SAC, AB, PG, as well as all the other stakeholders. So the key thing for us in this project is making sure we've got the timings right, because some of these groups and committees only meet monthly. So if we miss one slot, it becomes quite difficult. So, and yeah, so we're looking at a few other things, as I said, just on the community force side, generally in terms of functional improvements, primarily sort of the pre-ranking, which will support the selection committee process, but sort of other bits and pieces. So that's one part of it, and then the other part is the data. So I don't know if you remember last time, but I threw out a few facts and figures around the number of scholarships that were under a certain cost or under a certain value, monetary value, and also the costs of actually maintaining those. So what we've done is we've had a few discussions with alumni and UCs, that's Joe Dowling and others, and Joe's very kindly taken a few examples and we'll sort of put them through the channel, so to speak, or the pilot. And what she's done is she's gone through and had a look at sort of the regulation documents, or not so much the regulation, but any sort of legal underpinnings, trust documents that really support the regulations. Because what we want to try and see is how much change can we get away with without having to go down the legal route in terms of going to court or anything like that. So I think the initial findings are pretty encouraging. So Joe's given us some options, and I think anecdotally, she has said that we can do quite a lot of changes. I think the regulations, we've sort of constrained ourselves. It's not actually sort of on a legal basis that we have to do a lot of these things. So that means that we can hopefully get some sort of quicker wins in terms of changes. Bear in mind we have to go through the process for all the decision-making bodies to agree those. So I wouldn't say quick as in it's going to be done next week. And also sort of the work on the guidelines as well. So what we're doing is we're just going to the senior management team and just putting a summary paper together in terms of the new guidelines we're proposing to implement, the rationalisation exercise, which I've just sort of touched on, and there's one other thing which I forgot. So it's just 3 components, and then hopefully that will sort of, if there's in-principle endorsement, help sort of expedite the process for the other decision-making bodies in theory, so we'll see how it goes. In terms of I think last time we were talking about doing data analysis. So we've got the data, we've collected more data just around sort of general ledger. We've looked at the opening and closing dates and double checked all those because that feeds into the postgrad round. And we've also looked at all the data in JADE. So the data in JADE, because now we've got the data, we can't just stick them in Community Force because there's data in JADE, people maintain that, it feeds to academic records and all that. So now we know what's in both areas, we have to do an assessment in terms of what goes where and how does it integrate and is it kept updated. So we're going to start engaging sort of the solution architecture and specialists in that area to advise us. So that's going to be sort of one of the focuses. And we did start looking at the scholarship search engine, but because we learnt a bit about it and how that works, and essentially JADE feeds data into a database overnight, and there's a solution called SIS, which essentially powers the search engine. So before we touch any of that, we have to understand where the data is going to reside so that we don't, break the process and it's an efficient search process. And on top of that, there's a whole lot of other search tools which we can use. So we'll focus on this part and then we'll look at that part. We could do some tweaks and changes to improve the searches, but it would be quite temporary and transient, so it probably wouldn't be worth the effort. So we'd probably look just to go to the end solution. So that's just scholarships, really. If anyone's got any questions or queries. Or...
And just, I was thinking about you talking about smoke testing, and I know a lot of times we talk about testing, UAT, defect testing, and stuff like that. Do you mind just giving like a 30-second overview of what all the different testing are?
Yes.
Just for...
Yes. So in terms of what we do, I suppose, in the delivery cycle is we do what's called, I suppose, functional testing and non-functional testing. So we look at the features that we've developed, and we look at sort of how the users are actually going, the user experience behind those. And that's sort of roughly in a nutshell, functional, non-functional, although people can jump in and correct me if they want to add anything there. So in terms of the user acceptance testing, the UAT, and this is where we say we think it's pretty good, we can actually put it out and sort of leverage off the experience in the business. Because although we're looking at it from one point of view, we may not have thought about all the different business contexts in which it's going to be used. And so that sort of flushes out sort of any other issues. Regression testing is where we sort of think, okay, then we think we're pretty good, but because we're getting feedback continuously, we're constantly changing things. So something we thought was good a few weeks ago might have been broken. And smoke testing essentially is putting everything into production. Well, in this instance, there could be other sort of descriptions about smoke testing, but putting it into production and really just actually doing a sort of a mini go live, but not officially sort of publishing that fact. And it just de-risks things because there's some things that you can test in the test environment, but all the environments that we use are different and configurations could change. Someone could forget to do something in one environment, and yeah, so it's just really further de-risking the release process. So I think I've covered it. Any other questions or queries? No? No, thank you. Who's next? Tim.
Hey everyone. Right. Short and sweet, because James already talked about this. Really, the key things to note here is that we have a portal light that agents are able to access, but we're taking it slowly at this point because really this early release is at a pre-production level in terms of usability. We have enhancements scheduled to go in which are improving fundamental usability around the application form for agents. Those things are tracking through over the course of this month, targeting 9th of August release. We have an agent transition slowly happening. We've identified there are actually some agents that could move over earlier because they're actually applying directly through MyUC as if they were a student at the moment. So they're already used to the application form in its current state. The key thing here is that given the value of our international students, we really just have to be slow and measured in the way that we move agents across into the portal. They've had a bit of a lumpy ride over the last 18 months where we've moved them from one to another. Where they're currently at is a happy place for a lot of them. And we want to make sure that the experience that they walk into feels like a continuation of their experience rather than yet another lumpy transition. So August 9th, there will be continued enhancements that will happen post that point, but we are hopeful that come this date we'll have everything in place for agents to start applying directly. James?
It might be a week later.
Maybe a week later, which is fine. What's a week? What's a week? It's important come October, but we've got a week here. I guess some of the big ones to note is that we actually get some parallel uplift from the enhancements that are being made on the agent portal in that other students will benefit. So other international direct students will benefit from the improvements that happen here, cleaning up some of the wording. These are the things that we would have loved to have done at the tail end of last year, because if you remember, we literally picked SITS up and put it down as a carbon copy with a bit of a new front face, but we didn't do much work under the hood to change wording and the way that we asked questions. But we're starting to introduce what I call internationalization of the application form. And then over here, as part of my UC enhancements generally, which will benefit agents, but they will also benefit international students and domestics. So these are things around academic history. I don't know how many of you are particularly familiar with the application form, but the way we ask for certain bits of information is somewhat confusing. You know, for a postgraduate student, we ask them what was their highest high school qualification, and you go, it's not really relevant. So just some of those obvious things to clean up, which will happen towards the tail end of the year. But really, the big thing is that we've now got a pathway to a completely integrated agent portal, so we get all the benefits of data flowing straight into Jade, some reporting benefits, and it sets us up well for some of the other work that's happening in my other project, admission and enrollment management. Does anyone have any questions on the agent portal?
Tim, do you just want to communicate the change in project management?
Oh yeah, sorry. I am caretaking this through to its conclusion. So it allows James to focus on that complicated beast, which is our delivery pipeline, which requires a heck of a lot of coordination. And the project is at a point now which it really just requires a little bit of oversight, and we've just got a process to follow. So if you've got questions around Agent Portal, I'm your man. All right, admission and enrollment management. I'm pleased to say we actually are in delivery, so we spent a lot of time digging deep and uncovering what's going on around this process. And we have 3 distinct streams of work. The first one actually is kicked off today, the enrol in person process. So I don't know if you've been into the concourse today, but there's a different setup as opposed to previous years where students are booking in to enrolment sessions. They get whisked off on a tour of this building, James Height, and down in the Undercroft, and the administration of their enrolment happens behind the scenes. So instead of sitting there going station by station, they actually get a value add. And I went on the tour yesterday and it was really cool. Hey Trish, like it was. We learned a few things. So that is July. There's going to be a big planning that comes out of this because we've really done this in the smell of an oily rag. We haven't invested a heck of a lot of time or resource into this. But it's allowed us to remain pretty nimble around approaches, and also it's kind of shaking the tree to find some lessons learned. This period is all around hardening that, so it's ready for essentially a 5-6 times bigger enrolment period come 2019. So that's going to be our challenge in the next 6 months, is can we scale the experience? We're pretty confident we can. So if you do get a chance, I encourage you to go check out the concourse. Just go and say hey and see what's going on. The busy days will be Monday next week and Friday next week as well. And there's some study abroad days happening on the 11th and 12th. But open day is the 12th, am I right? So I can imagine you're all going to be pretty busy that day. So teacher program entry process review. So this is the beginning of, I suppose, where we go deep across all the functional teams that are responsible for admission and enrolment. The reason we have gone with teaching is teaching remains one of the last programs that sits outside of our, I guess, standard process for the way that we do admission and enrolment. And we're about 5 weeks away from integrating that into the mainstream. What we're learning here is going to apply to other programs across the university, and a conversation we had with the DMA last week was, what program do we pick off next? What's going to be highest value, what creates the most amount of work, where we can bring some efficiency and alignment and process into the way that program entry gets done. So we're covering everything from processes, roles and responsibilities, communications. So we're actually setting up a lot of the foundations for the other programs, and the theory goes that these other ones will be faster because we'll be able to transfer a lot of the thinking and approach across the other programs. And finally, a general admission enrollment process enhancements. So this is looking at a broader level, not deep dive into program entry, just how do we get more efficiencies in the way that we work and communicate across the admission enrollment process. And that includes getting some technical infrastructure in place to support our workflow, communications, decision making, and the insights. And this really has got a big dependency on our new CRM that we're going through the process of selecting and standing up. But once we have that bottom layer, we will be able to start chipping away at specific areas. And the first one is looking likely to just be, you know, the weekly reporting that you'll receive around where applications are at in the pipeline. It's most likely that that is where we're going to start, because without that we don't really have a framework to hang any of our work onto. James?
What's a CRM?
CRM, a customer relationship management system. What it is, it's a way of managing these types of work. So in more sales-orientated organizations, it's used for managing leads and prospects, so people that are thinking about coming to the university. I mean, underneath the academic guides, this admission enrollment process, you could argue, is a sales and conversion process. And we have essentially a quality standard that potential students have to cross in order to buy the education that they want to buy. But fundamentally, a CRM is a really good tool that comes with all these pre-configured ways of working that would support the processes that we have in place. So it means we don't have to build stuff, basically, because the process that James went through is a process that's, I suppose, designed to manage custom software development. But with a tool out of the box, we can get a lot more traction quicker because we're not building anything from scratch. A lot of those patterns of how the system works to support the way we work are already pre-configured. So we can just stitch things together rather than have to type it all. Does that cover it? Does anyone have any questions?
Do we know what CRM platform they're going for?
At this point, it's likely going to be Salesforce. That's what we've put our submission into ITS for. And it comes with a whole lot of higher education process already baked into it. But the trick with this is about how do we put a nice container around it and make sure we don't let it run wild, because CRMs do have a tendency to take over.
Is Community Force and Salesforce, are they owned by the same?
No, completely different. Yeah. I think one thing that when we start talking about this is we'll be de-emphasizing the technology. Like, it's important because we can't do any of the things that you really are interested in, the workflow, so handing off between people, escalation points, you know, sending reminders out to students, reminders out to staff, tracking decision making, tracking when did I speak to a student, when did my colleague speak to a student about what. So think about some of the benefits around student care that comes by having a 360-degree view of a lead right from the beginning, when we first have a chat to them, potentially in India or China, or at a school up in Auckland, all the way through to when they're over here as an alumnus. Is that the singular of an alumnus? Yes.
Yeah, but it's only the men.
Okay. What's the correct word?
If you want one woman, it's an alumna.
Alumna.
You want a Latin lesson? I can give you one.
Let's start now.
Okay, so if you're an alumnus or an alumna over here, We want to know about you. So we want to know about that connected journey all the way through. Because there's so much rich data that we can get, we just need to get the infrastructure in place to manage it. Any questions? This here is where you'll start to see a lot of kind of some of the benefits of the work that you've invested into over the last couple of months. Not all of you at once, but there will be certain teams that will be able to actually pick off quite quickly. Cool.
Thanks, Tim. We're sort of getting a little short on time, so I will keep this a little...
One announcement.
Okay. And James has got an announcement for us at the end, so we'll hold a little bit of time there. But I will just introduce a couple of ideas around what I wanted to talk about today. And some of you actually probably have been in this conversation with me already, but for the benefit of others that haven't, I thought it was worthwhile just raising with you. But we might go into this in more depth at a later time. What I wanted to share with you really is that we have adopted, as many of you would know, the ProSci change methodology to the Student First program. And ProSci was really a methodology that has been built over sort of the last 25 years, and it was traditionally very much orientated around what we would call a waterfall delivery type approach. And in project work where you would use a waterfall approach, the idea is really that you take a whole bunch of time at the start to gather all of your requirements about the solution you want to achieve, and then you slowly work your way through the different stages of development to the end when then you produce the final result. From a change perspective, that was actually quite an advantage because it gave you a really nice long lead time and kind of a systematic way in which you could work through the stages of change in respects to sort of getting teams aware of what's happening, the desire, the knowledge, and working through that process was quite an easy thing to do in that type of environment. Obviously within the Student First program, we're actually working within this agile delivery environment. And what that means is that just like ProSci are going through now themselves, we are also as a change management team having to adapt our approach to this sort of new process of delivery. So instead of that nice linear picture we had before, we now have a view that looks a lot more like this. And a couple of things really just to point out here is when we're working through a release, the development team is going through a number of these sprint cycles where they're building bits of functionality, and then finally it all gets bundled up into something that we obviously then adds value to the business and we're releasing out to the business. From a change perspective, what it really means is that we also have to kind of align to this cycle, and often there are implications to that in respects that around delivering knowledge and ability to stakeholders. If we don't actually know what that end product is exactly going to look like, it's not really easy for us to do that at this stage. So what it really means is that we need to revisit these things with our stakeholders on a much more regular basis as the picture becomes clearer for the change team as we get nearer and nearer to when we're actually releasing. So a really good example of that is our training, and we've already experienced this quite a number of times in the work we've delivered already, that this is happening right at the very last minute because the trainers are getting their content right near the end of the release or right before the release occurs. So it really has an effect on us that it compresses timeframes. It also means that from a communication perspective, we need to aim to be doing that more frequently and informally rather than having these nice regular monthly check-ins that we can have, because it's often the case that we need to perhaps be very concentrated with one particular team for a short period of time. And again, we've had examples of that where we need to sort of just come in and do some intensive type work with a team who might be impacted by this portion of the release, but not so much by the other components. So yeah, I guess I won't probably go into it too much more today, just due to time, but it's just to give you an insight into the journey that we're kind of on really from a change perspective, and that we're learning along the way as well as to different ways in which we can sort of, I guess, deliver our outputs in this different environment. And I think one of the challenges also for us is that not only are we sort of getting people at UC or staff at UC more familiar with having projects supported by a change management component, there's actually the whole concept of understanding this way of working. So it's not only about being brought up to speed and taking along the journey from a student first project delivery perspective, but also actually getting your head around the way in which we're working, and that's dealing with things like a much greater level of uncertainty as to what the final product will be, not having that long timeline of what you're going to get, and those sorts of challenges. So really the message I wanted to convey is that we are kind of experiencing the same things and going through the same things that we are hoping and expecting that UC staff will go through, and that's one of those things that we will continue to invest some time into. And we've started talking with HR about potentially looking at providing some opportunities for professional development, sort of to get some better understanding of the methodology itself, so that it's a little bit easier to kind of get some understanding of how the program is working, and then therefore how the change activity integrates with that. So that's probably enough for today, but does anyone have any questions on that? Cool. It will be something that we continue to sort of drill in, I suppose. You'll hear us talking about it more and more frequently. And of course, as we figure out the best way to apply the change management activities to it, you know, that's going to evolve as well. So yeah, it's just one of those things that we just have to continue to try things, and when things don't work, we need to adapt what we're doing and respond to those changes, just like this whole methodology or development methodology works. James, you had something?
I was going to just say, I
yep.
just thought that the way we did the training last week before the release, 2 days before, was actually really good. It's just before the release.
Yeah, so there are advantages. Obviously, we know, you know, we're much more certain there as to what we need to be advising you of. If we tried to do it back here, we would be probably telling you stuff that's likely to change before the release actually goes live. So yeah, it just puts a lot of pressure, I suppose, on the training team in the Student First program. But that's okay, we're learning to deal with that. An update from James,
yes.
Or an extra from James, before we finish up?
Sorry, I forgot to mention it. I said if you want to provide feedback, but I didn't actually say how. So if you're not familiar, we have a shared mailbox, the Student First shared mailbox. Please direct all your feedback through there. And also, we want to be able to work with users as we start to roll out this functionality and make sure that it's well tested and the user experience is as good as it can be. So if you want to put your hand up, or you know people in your teams that would want to put your hands up, or you have access to students who would want to put their hands up to help us test functionality, then also you can let us know through the Student First shared mailbox.
Thanks, James. That was really timely, because I was actually going to remind people about that. You didn't even see me bring that slide up behind you. Very much around that feedback. Look, it's a bit of a work in progress within the program to manage all the feedback that comes in, and I'm playing a bit of a role in coordinating that within the team. And our program coordinator, Suzanne, finished up with us last week. So we have a new person taking over some of that responsibility. So we'll be pulling all that together. But I guess the key message is we collect info from all different sources, and we have quite a good process, and I've been explaining that with individuals and how that works. There's some fine-tuning, as I said, to make that run really slick. But the number one message is, if you've got things that you want to be absolutely sure are being captured and are going to be taken on board by the program and responded to, that email address is the method in which to submit it. So even though you may have mentioned it in passing to someone, or you've had a conversation in the hallway, if you haven't seen any action on that, that's the place to send it. Through our internal quality assurance reviews that we have, that was a point that was emphasised to us, that we need to have a really robust single channel where people can have an assurance, or stakeholders can have an assurance that that's going to be received. Because again, with the interdependencies of the projects, a lot of the conversations that are happening with multiple business analysts or project managers, and sometimes it is quite hard to really ensure that the right information and feedback's been captured. So yeah, just reinforcing that point of James's really. We've come to the end of the session, but does anyone have any final questions or comments for today? Otherwise, thanks again for attending, and we will see you next month.